Welcome to the section on validating forms and making HTTP requests. In the previous section, we learned about extending Ionic 2 with Angular 2 components. In this section, we'll see how to validate user inputs such as text, number, and required versus not required, and communicate the data to another page, learn how to render data without having an actual back-end, and also how to process payments using Stripe. Now we move on to the first video of this section that deals with creating a complex form with input validation. In this video, we'll learn to build an app to demonstrate form validation using ngForm and ngControl. All mobile apps require taking user input and sending it to a back-end server. A simple example is filling out a form, such as a user registration or contact form. The information is validated against a set of rules before being sent to the back-end. Also, there are many other scenarios where the information is captured based on user behavior from the app, such as where they touch or how much time they spend on a certain page. Regardless, you'll run into many send and retrieve data scenarios. As we'll see in this section, all of these topics are actually available natively in Angular 2. However, since Angular 2 has a lot of changes compared to Angular 1 in terms of processing data and working with the back-end server, it's worth covering these topics in detail. This is the form that we're going to create. If the user tries to submit without providing valid information, the form will show the error shown here. Basically, the name field is required. The phone field is the number type but is optional. The comment field is required, and the user must enter at least 4 characters. Of course, this is just for demonstration of the input length. The user finally must agree to the terms and conditions via the toggle input. After a successful validation, the user will be taken to the second screen with a summary of the previous screen as shown here. This app example could work either in a browser or on a physical device. However, you can optionally connect your physical device to verify the phone field for number keypad. Now let's see how we can go about this. Let's create a new form validation app using the blank template. At first, go to the Ionic folder and type this command. Type Ionic start my form validation blank --v2. So this is the command you need to type to create the MyForm validation app. Now you can see it's being created. It will take a while to create all the packages. You can take a break and return when it's done. Now that it's done, open the MyForm validation app in our VS Code. You can do this by typing code --. Go through the MyForm validation app shown on screen. Once created, go to the folder. Type cd MyForm validation. So once we are there, you can open the MyForm validation app in the VS Code. For that, type code --. As you can see, it directly opens in the Visual Studio Code. Now we need to edit some of the files. Open the app modules.ts file, which is in source app. Type import. This is the file wherein the code needs to be replaced with code you can see on the screen here. Once we have imported the thank you page and the MyForm service, we need to include the thank you page in declaration. Also ensure that you have included thank you page in the entry components and set the MyForm service as the provider. Once done, save the changes made. You may realize that there is a common service to be used across the app called MyForm service here. This example also has a second page called thank you page. Now let's create the service by first creating a directory as shown. Go to the terminal and type this command. Now moving on to the VS Code, you can see that the services folder is created here. So we need to create myforms.ts file. Right-click, new file, rename it as myform.ts. Once done, you have to add lines of code here. Here we are importing the injectable from the Angular core and creating the annotation of the injectable, and then creating a class called myFormService, which contains 3 elements, which are name, phone, and comment. Lastly, we're creating the constructor. Once done, save the file. This example will keep the service components simple for demonstration purposes. Open and edit the home.html that is in source, pages, home template as shown. We need to replace the code with this. As you can see, here we're creating the contact form that has a name, phone and comment as the input parameters, and lastly we'll have a submit button along with a toggle button. One would need to agree to the terms and conditions in the toggle button. Once done, save the file. This is probably the most complicated part of the form validation process because there are many places where you have to embed validation logic for the input. Now open the SCSS file and replace the content of the home.scss file with the code you are going to see here. Save the file once complete. Now we need to edit the home.ts file. As you can see, it's in the same folder, and replace this content with the code here. Here we have imported the thank you and the my service form pages. You may note that there isn't much validation code in the JavaScript part. This means that the template takes care of a lot of the validations. There is also an import command for a thank you and a my form service page, which we'll have to create next. Here we are specifying the name, phone, comment as false, and then we would be creating an activity on the onSubmit button, and give the command to redirect to the thank you page on clicking the submit button. Now let's create the thank you folder. Let's go to the terminal and type this command. As you can see, in the Pages tab, a thank you folder is created. Now create a thankyou.js file in the components directory that you just created. Here, let's add some lines of code. Here we're importing the component and the myForm service. We're creating a template URL of thankyou.html and then calling the constructor of myForm service and giving the form data. This page just renders the data from the myForm service, so you can keep it very simple. Let's create thankyou.html in the same folder as illustrated. Here we would need to add these lines of code. Now let's create one more file called thankyou.scss in the same folder as shown. This will contain a CSS line of code. These are the CSS commands that we need to add in the SCSS file and save. Now let's edit the app.scss file to ensure that you include both the .scss files in the two pages. Let's go to the app. Here's our file. They're the two commands that need to be included in the SCSS file to get it working. Save all the files. Once done, go to your terminal and run the app with Ionic serve. Awesome! As you can see, we have successfully created the contact form. Time for some testing. Let's say my name, contact number, and here I'll write a comment. Say my app and check the toggle button agreeing to the terms and conditions. If this is not done and we try to submit, it will generate an error message. Now you can see the thank you page is displayed with the information you have entered in the contact form page. Yes, we have successfully created our app. Now we'll see how it works. Go to the code editor. If you look at the home.html file where most of the validation code is located, just look at the structure of this page. It's very typical. You have Ion navbar with Ion title. The form element must be inside the Ion content area. It's a requirement to use the form element for Angular 2 validation to work. Otherwise there will be no submit event and you cannot catch errors for each input. We can see the form variable here. To assign a local variable on the fly, you use the hash sign. This means that you want the f variable to refer to ngForm, which is automatically created from Angular 2. This is a special object that contains everything related to the current form. You're advised to use noValidate to bypass the default HTML5 validation, because you're using Angular 2 for validation instead. Otherwise, the form will acquire conflicts. The ngSubmit is pretty much an event to trigger the onSubmitF function, whenever the button with type equals submit is touched or clicked. When you submit the form, it will pass the f variable along so that you can process the object inside the onSubmit method. The form template consists of just Ion list and Ion item. You just need to know how to validate each input and display the error. Let's use the name field as the first example. This is the Ion input for name. The error is displayed in the div tab. To validate, you must assign the name of a local variable name. This is to refer to that input using f.controls.name in other areas. Recall that the f variable has been declared previously as the ngForm object. Here is a view of how the ngForm is structured. You can view this using the Chrome Developer Console because the code actually gives this output when you submit the form. The error message "name is required" will be hidden when either of these conditions takes place. The form has not been submitted yet, otherwise people will see the error message right away before they even type in something. This is not a good user experience. To check for this, you have to use a temporary boolean called isSubmitted. The f.controls.name.pristine variable means that the input has not been modified. The opposite of this would be f.controls.name.dirty. The f.controls.name.valid variable is true. However, you cannot check this right away because if the input is empty, the name object does not yet exist. That's why you need to check for the existence of f.controls.name before checking for valid boolean. There is no need to check the phone requirement, so you just need to assign name and model as shown. For the comment field, there is a need to validate using both required, min length equals 4. You may think required is unnecessary because if the length is 0, Angular 2 will trigger an error flag. However, that's not true. When the user doesn't enter anything in the input will have no length because the variable doesn't exist. That's why you need to check for both scenarios. The error message for the comment field is quite interesting because it shows the number of characters the user needs to enter. This code helps with that. The main idea here is that you only want to show this div when the form is submitted, and it's pristine via f.controls.comment.pristine. This means that the user has not yet entered anything in the form. You also want to show the message when the form is dirty and has errors via f.controls.comments.errors. If you inspect the console, you can see a list of many detailed errors under the f.controls.comment.errors object. In order to tell the user how many characters they have left to enter, you have to first check f.controls.comment.errors.minlength, because if that variable doesn't exist, there is no error or the comment input is empty. If you do not check for this, you will get a parse error later on. In our home.ts file, the onSubmit method must toggle the isSubmitted boolean to true. Then we'll have to do a general check for myForm.valid and myForm.value.tos. The reason is that there is no way to validate a toggle button in Angular 2 since it doesn't make sense to do so, as it cannot be required. Therefore, you have to do a custom validation here to make sure it's true in the form. This means that the user has checked the Agree to Terms and Conditions toggle. This is a minor detail that could be a bug in Ionic 2, currently beta 21. For each toggle button, it acts as a type equals submit button by default, since there is no type attribute assigned. That's why you need to cancel the submit event by calling prevent default method. The thank you page is very self-explanatory because we just passed the form data in the template by getting the data from the myFormService service. For more information, I'm going to provide a few links here. For more information about form from the Angular 2 documentation, you can visit this site and the ng form site. The Ionic documentation has its own page specifically for Ionic input components, which is this site on ionicframework.com. It also has a good list of HTML5 input types that you can use for validation or keyboard enforcement, which you can find at this link. In this video, we learned to create a complex form with an input validation.